Welcome, and thank you for joining the webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping rules before we start. Use the widgets at the bottom to discover the platform features. Adjust your widget sizes, such as the presentation slides, by clicking and dragging the corners of each box. Submit any technical queries by clicking on the first icon. Submit questions via the Q&A box. Please fill out the pop-up survey at the end of or any time to provide us with feedback. Slide deck and recording will be circulated after the webinar. Click the media player on your screen to enable sound, ensuring Flash is enabled on your browser. If the slides are stuck, please refresh your browser by pressing F5. There is no dial-in. Please use your device sound to listen to the webinar or plug in your earphones. Right, with that, we are going to start the webinar. Right. So welcome everyone again. My name is Franita Newville, and I am Refinitiv's Sales Director for our Research and Portfolio Management Division in Western Europe. There's definitely no doubt that the 2020 coronavirus pandemic has heightened awareness of the importance of sustainability, which has now firmly placed ESG on the map for most financial market participants, from corporate treasury teams to traditional asset management firms and hedge funds. And this year, the human race realized that we are more vulnerable and fragile, more interconnected and interdependent than ever. The severity and frequency of health-related outbreaks and the climate-related extreme weather events is very likely to increase in the future. Hence the need for resilient economies and societies, and which makes economic policy approaches such as the EU's Green Deal vital. And it's not only the pandemic that has accelerated a move towards ESG in 2020. With Joe Biden's recent win in the US elections, the federal government is also expected to now shift decisively on its climate policy. Another ESG-related theme that has received a lot of attention in 2020 is the dawn of hydrogen fuel, with the next significant transformation in energy transition expected to be based on the hydrogen economy. We even saw the launch of a hydrogen-powered sports car by Hyperion in August this year. But it wasn't just greener cars who saw the light of day, as we also saw the launch of a new ESG-related asset class called transition bonds. So these are some of the topics I will be discussing today with Dr. Barnabas Aks. Barnabas is Refinitiv's Global Sales Readiness Director for Sustainable Finance, and is constantly exploring how the combination of data and technology can help to build a more sustainable and circular economy. He published a DuPont model of clean economy and developed the Corporate Emissions Index. He is a permanent contributor to the Refinitiv Sustainability Perspectives podcast, is a lecturer on the Sustainable Finance Certification course at the Budapest Institute of Banking, and is a committee member of the Green Frog Corporate Reporting Awards. Welcome, Barney, and thank you for joining us today. So before we start, I know that I mentioned Q&A. We would like to keep the session as interactive as possible. So please feel free to post questions as we go, and Barney and I will actually work through them as we go through the conversation. So let's start off by having a look backward at 2020 and the main trends that will shape the ESG agenda into 2021. With coronavirus vaccines now being rolled out in countries such as the UK and the US and also Canada, conversations are focusing more on the economic impact and recovery from COVID-19, especially the green recovery plans. Barney, could you please take us through the economic implications the pandemic had in 2020 and the main plans some countries are looking to adopt going forward?
Thank you for the introduction and the opening notes, Franita. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's great that we are so close to Christmas and the holiday season. So hopefully we are going to have a very active fireside chat today. We have brought a couple of slides to you as well. I think the storyline we want to tell here is put COVID-19 into perspective and show that if we think that this was serious, then other things like climate change or biodiversity collapse that can happen if we don't really take immediate actions, then that's going to be even more serious, and that's represented with the size of the waves. And of course, we all remember that we have to wash our hands. That's the smallest spot on the left corner in the bottom. This of course sets us up for a decade full of actions and a couple of trends that we have to look at, and that set of trends is of course translating into immediate action points that are affecting 2021. So when we were discussing how we want to approach 2021 with Refinitiv, we sort of thought, all right, let's put COVID into perspective, check what is actually derived from that for the next decade, and what does it mean for 2021. Numbers are coming, so brace yourselves. When we talk about the effects of COVID, then hopefully you see the top left hand side of this slide deck. The numbers what I'm going to tell you are just a little bit different because the numbers I have are coming from the latest IMF report, and no complaining, but they didn't update the charts next to it. So the global effect of COVID-19 was 4.4% GDP contraction, or is going to be estimated to be that during 2020. This is for 2021, it's projected to be 5.2%. The sort of the contraction globally, with or compared with the financial crisis in 2009, is 2.6 times bigger, so almost 3 times as severe as it was in 2009, and we already thought at that time that that's doomsday. Of course, there are different regional differences there. The Eurozone contracted 8.3%. This is 2 times more than it was in the financial crisis. Of course, different parts are hit more severely than others in the Eurozone. What is good news that the US has contracted with 4.3%, which is only 1.7 times more serious than it was during the financial crisis. However, how it's felt is of course also measurable in the unemployment rates, and the Eurozone unemployment rose to 8%. And what is actually interesting, if I can use that word, that's a similar rate of change than it was in 2009, i.e. the unemployment rate rose with 21%. What is really surprising and somewhat shocking is that the US unemployment rose to 8.9% from 3.8% last year. This is nearly twice as serious as it was and also was last time. So we can see how much fiscal stimulus can add to dampening different situations. What also adds to the problem is that school closures during the pandemic could set back human capital accumulation severely, and the fact that the levels of indebtedness of countries currently are way higher than it was in 2009. Just to call out one number, please do fact check me on this. I believe around 2009, the percentage indebtedness to the GDP in the US was around 38 percentage points. And back in 2019, that was nearly 100%. So the levels are very different. And of course, with human capital having serious impact as well through digital education, we have to have a different view on how do we set the economy onto a new course. And why this is important is because on the right-hand side, what you can see, is the the fossil fuel industry's asset strandedness, so to say. So that's a $2.2 trillion value coming from different coal and other technology setbacks. And with the factors that I have mentioned, no country can afford to basically keep the old structure in place and invest into infrastructure that is going to be stranded or seriously negatively impacted in the coming decades, given that these are multi-year investments ahead, and of course multi-trillion-dollar investments. So that is why I believe it's very important, and it's actually very encouraging to see that different countries have, all around the globe, have declared some sort of way or change. Obviously, the EU was sort of the most of the forefront during the year, with the 750 billion recovery plan for the next 7-year budget, which is an addition to the sort of the general pot, and 30% of that would have to go into sustainability-related investments. So that's of course a very new view. And what's also important that when financing the budget, we have the definition of the own sources, and there are new concepts about own sources, like, for example, non-recycled plastic waste or carbon border setup, etc., etc. Some of them are in the planning phases, but very encouraging to see that there are serious commitments towards that. Of course, with the UK also in the forefront, for unfortunately for more negative or serious reasons, I believe it's very good news that the communication is trying to be steered away from Brexit, and the new course is being set by the 10.12 billion green industrial revolution communication coming from the British government, which has several elements. We will get into that. US, you mentioned, Franita, about the pace of change and about the direction as well. China has pledged the carbon neutrality by 2060 and peaking CO2 emissions by 2030. India also has made commitments to infrastructure investment by Prime Minister Modi, and the newly elected Prime Minister in Japan, Mr. Suga, has also highlighted carbon neutrality, or pledged carbon neutrality by 2050, and investing and taking into serious look into the green and digital technologies. So if we can, globally there is a change of mindset, and the buzzwords are around sustainability, digitalization, infrastructure that is adapting to climate change, and of course underpinning all this regulation, which is very active currently in Europe, and we are expecting it to be even more active in the States and other regions.
Great, thanks, Barney. That's a great overview, and I think it is quite interesting to note that the US contraction wasn't, as severe as expected, or as some of the other regions in the world. But from an employment perspective, they were very hard hit, which stands out in those numbers. Talking a little bit more about the US. So now that Joe Biden has actually won the presidential elections, what do you expect from the US government regarding its climate policy in 2021 and onwards in more detail? Could you tell us a little bit more about Joe Biden's plan for a clean energy revolution?
Yeah, no, definitely. Just before we start, I just want to do some self-branding here. We have the Sustainability Perspectives, the podcast at Refinitiv, and we have dedicated with way more prepared speakers than I am in this topic to Joe Biden and the shift in the administration's plans. So I encourage every listener to this webinar to go to that and have a closer look. how I see it, or how sort of we see it immediately now, is there are two aspects. One is, of course, the boldness and the ambitious side, which has to be more than sort of BAU, if I may use that word, because, of course, there is quite a lot of ground to cover after 4 years of basically climate denial. And drawbacks of different Obama era initiatives, or even prior him. The other challenge is, of course, how much can be carried out and how it can be sorted out in federal levels. If we talk about the ambitiousness side of the things, there are 5 pillars which the Biden administration has sort of put forward in their plans when approaching the elections. One was the U.S. achieving 100% clean energy economy and become net zero by no later than 2050. This plan is very, very much alike the 10-point plan to the UK, so this pillar. And there is a very strong infrastructure planning or pillar mentioned, which is basically adapting to climate with the new infrastructure. What is interesting that it calls out the second railroad revolution, which should be the cleanest, the safest, and the fastest in the world. Now, this is maybe the thing that I'm most sort of have the mindset of challenging than knowing the very good infrastructure that Japan has. The other point, the third pillar, is rally the rest of the world, which of course is very much needed, and the fact that John Kerry was nominated as climate envoy and member to the Security Council. It's a National Security Council is definitely underpinning that kind of commitment, and maybe one of the main things from that is to pursue a global moratorium on offshore drilling in the Arctic Circle. So that would be a great achievement. We know how things are standing at the moment. And the fourth element is basically home economy, stand up to the abuse of power polluters, and basically use again the Environmental Protection Agency to really fill the current void of filing lawsuits against companies who are polluting. And the fifth one, and to me one of the most important ones, especially from messaging perspective, is that this plan doesn't intend to leave behind anybody. So it definitely calls out the earlier industrial revolution participants, like the coal miners, for them to be inclusive and having a respectful handling and not left behind. So this is the 5 pillars. Of course, what really stands out is the climate neutrality by 2050, and of course, the effects then actually the factors that can affect that is of course the Congress, how much the president is aligned with the Congress on different things, on policy and on implementation questions. And there is an amazing study put out by BCG, a new course for climate in the US, that discusses this and actually puts up a really good spreadsheet on an alignment with Congress. And of course, the other question is the Senate. We know that Georgia is still outstanding and it can sway what direction we are going to go, but we have to definitely get prepared to in best case scenario, to a very narrow margin in both the sort of the Congress and the Senate. So with that in mind, what's important is that, of course, we know about the executive actions, but what's very important is the federal leasing and permitting authority that can be used, and this is what basically bans new fossil fuel leases on federal lands. And there is the financial regulatory authority that can actually seriously describe disclosure and implementation of different strategy settings and of course for companies and to disclose those. So that can be also a very powerful element, and there are national institutions who could carry that out. Let's say the SEC as well. What's somewhat good news in all that kind of puzzle is that And you mentioned hydrogen. Hydrogen especially is something which actually enjoys bipartisan support. It was Lindsey Graham who actually put forward the National Hydrogen Day for 8th of October. And of course, he has been an advocate of the technology for several decades. And that's quite aligned with the Biden administration's, state-of-the-art affordable technology in the future. So hopefully that we see that different tweets are very loud from contrasts and everything, but there should be a good combination of cover there. So positive on the states in that sense. And as scary as I mentioned earlier, as he was, his appointment definitely carries weight both nationally and internationally.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned hydrogen. It is definitely another topic we're going to get to later on. So let's park that for now. I quickly want to also talk to you about the EU and what's happening there. And you did mention, some of the funds that are already pumping in. I do understand that the SFDR level 2 has been postponed. Can you maybe give us a little bit more information as to why this happened? Is it something that we should be concerned about, seeing that the EU is usually at the forefront, when it comes to ESG matters, and what exactly does this mean?
Yeah, I mean, I would keep to that the EU is still in the forefront. I mean, the 10-point action plan on sustainable finance, and all the surroundings are basically a ready framework for corporate reporting, for different Paris-aligned benchmarks, of course, the taxonomy, the eco labels, etc., etc. So it's quite comprehensive, and I think it's quite advanced. And maybe just how I would start is for misunderstanding. It's actually not postponed. What SFDR is actually a general framework on sustainable finance disclosure for financial market participants like fund managers and financial advisors. So that's the sort of the level 1. And of course, that's supported with different technical regulatory standards, the sort of the RTSs that are sort of carrying that 50 metrics, the 32 compulsory and 18 voluntary metrics on the principal adverse impacts, which is basically stating on how actually you should disclose. Now, the level 2 is the one that has been postponed from March 2021 later to 2022. But level 1, the fact that you actually have to disclose, did not change. And, and receiving the news and of course being very enthusiastic about these things, actually made me realize that this might not be that bad because it will also allow more time for different financial market participants to actually work their way out and maybe disclose how they are doing it and what is the methodology that they are using. So it's going to be, or I look at it as a prolonged consultation period on the details. But reporting has to be done and it has to go ahead. And we at Refinitiv are fully pledged and actually delivery ready to provide assistance to all regulatory frameworks in that sense. So please don't think that you can lean back and enjoy the ride for another year. No, we definitely have to disclose.
Okay, good. Thanks, Barney, for that. We don't have any questions yet on the Q&A, and please remember, if you do have any questions or just general comments, feel free to post them onto the Q&A, and we'll incorporate them into this discussion. Next, I think, let's turn to hydrogen. There's been lots of mention of it already, in the previous discussions that we've had. It certainly seems like one of the main points that come up when you look at all the plans that countries have in place going forward. And there's lots of talk about the hydrogen economy, the Hyperion XP1 hydrogen electric supercar that was launched, the Hydrogen Council. Barney, do you actually believe that hydrogen is a viable option as the new sustainable energy source?
Yes, I do, and if I can sort of read in a little personal note on this, when I really started to delve into sustainability again in my second part of my career, the first book I bought was on fuel cells, which is basically hydrogen technology. And actually, if you look a little bit around yourselves, hydrogen is not so far away from us. So if you walk around in London and near Trafalgar Square, you will see buses which are fuel cell powered. So that's basically hydrogen. And the other one, the other nice info to have is that of course the NASA space shuttles are also operated by hydrogen. So that's what burns, and that's great with hydrogen. I think that it burns. And will help the transition, hopefully, in industries where we can't really electrify to the entirety, like in different aviation and freight. And what it's good about it, that when it burns, it basically produces water vapor. So it's a very clean burning material. The problem with it is that producing it, although it's the most abundant substances in universe, it's producing H2 is actually quite it's not an easy task. And this is where we sort of talk about the colors of hydrogen. Traditionally, hydrogen is color is gray or brown, where basically you use steam reformation, either nat gas or coal as a sort of a feedstock to create hydrogen. And of course, that brings with it a lot of CO2 emissions. And this is why the technology itself couldn't be viable for a while. But then there are two new sort of colors coming, have coming. One is the blue one, which is basically gray, i.e., nat gas, the nat gas solution with steam reforming, but putting carbon capture next to it. So basically you emit CO2, but at the same time you capture it. So that could be the blue solution. And the green solution is basically using electrolysis of water with low voltage current, and the current would come from the electricity would come from renewable technologies like wind farms, solar panels, etc., etc. And of course we are at the beginning of the journey, but the importance is shown that the capacity planning and everything has basically quadrupled from last year to this year, and there has been serious commitments made, even calling them out, like in the UK 10-point plan, hydrogen is I think number 2, and creating hydrogen-based strategies like Germany. Germany in June released a hydrogen strategy. So actually has the US. And what's really interesting with the German one is the magnitude of the spend. So they have, next to budget, they have allocated, I think, 7 billion euros plus 2 billion for international partnership building. I recall, I personal experience when I started to read about hydrogen in 2015. The news about working on sustainable infrastructure, we have set aside $32 million. That was the big news. So you can imagine $32 million versus 7 billion just in Germany. It's huge. And again, the German strategy is basically standing out in that sense that it's very, very thought through, and everybody thinks that they are going to be one of the leaders in there, because of course they actually have a quite good renewable foundation. They have very advanced chemical industry, which of course is a prime user or was prime user of hydrogen so far, and they don't really have too much holdings on nat gas. But they are not the only ones. I mean, there is Netherlands, there is Belgium, France, Switzerland, Austria, and Luxembourg who actually formed an alliance in order to advance this in Europe. So very strong technology in my mind, and a very promising one. And what's good about it is that it actually involves all the lobbies, because if you do the gray solution with carbon capture, then actually it can provide, and this is This is still under debate, but it can provide a transition from the gray to the green, and as such, can be embraced by fossil fuel heavy industries as well. And the financing is also very interesting, so with all the sustainability linked bonds that you mentioned in your intro, that's actually opening up a huge amount of opportunities.
Mm. Yeah, just continuing on that vein, it's interesting, hydrogen, we're reading a lot about it. There's a lot of talk about it. However, when we speak to clients, it's not really something that's coming up in conversations yet. So, I mean, from an asset class perspective, how should hydrogen be viewed at the moment? And how should it fit into an ESG investment strategy to promote the funding to organizations with a net zero anti-carbonization purpose?
Yeah, very funny. It's lucky that we have this webinar, at this time of the month, because on 14th of December, actually, there was a news that said that the European Energy Exchange (EEX) is exploring options for hydrogen contract trading. So that's an immediate asset class that you have there. The less so immediate ones are the transition financing vehicles. There is this burgeoning asset class of the sustainability linked bond or transition bond, which is the main characteristic of that one is that compared to green bond, which is basically a project financing mechanism. So you want to install a wind farm. This is making your environmental footprint less. So this is a green project. So that's a green bond. The transition bond or the sustainability linked bond is basically a firm-wide thing. So it's a set of actions instead of a project. So the company will have to have a clear decarbonization strategy and a set of projects and reporting, and it has to be based on science, and of course this and has to involve new technologies as well. But once that's done, then basically you can say that you are transitioning from A state to B state, and you are financing that with a new toolkit, which is the sustainability linked bonds or transition bonds. And there are some quite some small nomenclature differences, ICMA and CBI related definitions, but basically at the end of the day they mean the same. What's really outstanding with that is that it also puts in a penalization clause. So what it means is that you issue a bond, you have a strategy, you issue the bond too, and you actually make commitments. Like, for example, in the case of Enel, who were the first one to issue such a bond in 2019, I think it was $1.5 billion dollars or euros. I don't exactly remember, but basically what they said is that by 2021 they want their energy sources be 55% renewable energy sources, and if they don't meet that criteria, the bond runs until 2024. Then they will have to pay a 25 basis point penalty, interest penalty to the bond should they not meet the target. So, it's very incentivizing for the company to actually declare that they have a rough road ahead and they are transitioning. And it's also very good for the investment community to basically have an asset class that is having a label transition on it really ensures that we are going through some technology changes. And if there is sort of greenwashing or there is not living up to the expectations and the pathways, then there is a penalty. So it's not like, I announce something and I run with the money kind of stuff. So this is a new nascent, but why it's very important is because it introduces this kind of sustainability default concept and basically enables higher accountability to be expressed by investors and, of course, to be expressed to the companies. Just a number how burgeoning that is. 2019 was the first one with $1.5 billion issuance by Enel. now we are in 2022. This year only, there was, I think we are going to close with 12 billion in issuance. And in 2021, we are expecting a 40 billion in issuances. Just to put that into perspective, I think the first green bond was issued in 2004 or 5. It was, I think, 2016 or 17 by the time the 40 billion issuance mark per annum was reached. So that bond class needed to have 10 years to basically get into a status where transition bonds can be within 2 years. And the fact that the ECB is actually including this asset class and starts buying it as of Jan 1st in their asset purchase program is actually making it a very, very appealing financing mechanism, and as an investment tool as well.
No, sure. I think, and you briefly touched on it, but how are companies actually expected to prove that the money that they raise through transition bonds, get used for the purposes it was raised for? I mean, can it be that past transgressions can be rectified by the issuance of these types of instruments?
Yeah, if I understand the question correctly, so this is not. So what it means is not necessarily a project level. It means that, if you have an emission level in year 0 or in year 1, and you are committing that you want to have an emission level of year 3 or year 5, that's immediately measurable. If you are not doing that one extra project, that doesn't matter, as long as you really meet that kind of set criteria that you set yourself, either, and the KPI can be chosen by the company. And if the KPI is not liked by the investor, they can flag that. In the case of Enel, that was of course the sort of the percentage of renewable energy capacity within the company, which is an easily measurable and controllable thing. For example, in the case of the recent issuance in Schneider Electric one, there were actually social categories that were stated as, I think it was women on board or similar type of things. Please look into it, guys, more in detail. Happy to share details on that. By the way, IFR ESG briefings is just an amazing toolkit to follow all these market trends and issuances. You can get access to it on a daily briefing basis, or you can also check it out on our IFR website. Did I answer the question, Franita?
Yes, I think that was great. Thank you very much, Bonnie. Right, so Bonnie, that was all the questions that I had. We don't have any questions yet from the audience either.
Superb. Just a few words, because you see a couple of names or a couple of bullet points that we didn't discuss. I don't know how much time we have left, but maybe just 1 or 2 sentences. We have here 5 things to look at in 2021. We discussed the hydrogen and the new financing mechanisms. We discussed the more mandatory disclosures, of course, in the form of the states and with SFDR, and of course with the EU taxonomy roaming ahead. We have discussed the states as well. The 2 other things that are there is COP26, which is basically a revisit or a revision on the Paris Agreement and the Paris Agreement pathway. There is I forgot the name of the publisher. I think Science in Nature. That it's a UN institution that really measures the paths on Paris, and they actually don't have good news even with COVID-19 happening. So what they predict is that in 2020 we are going to see an emission drop of 4 to 7% compared to 2019. So if you think about the the fall of the economy or the contraction of the global economy, this kind of fall in CO2 emissions is pretty minimal. And that also means that countries didn't really do too much on the nationally determined contributions or commitments when they pledged to Paris. So there is a lot to do, and this will come into the forefront of attention in 2021. Of course, more countries are going to be put under sort of pressure, and more of them will have to commit and actually translate these kind of commitments into local regulation as well, beyond the ones that are there yet or there now. So that's something to look out for. And of course, the data for sustainability 2.0, you might have read the news, and this is actually a great thing, that for example, IRC and SASB have an intent to merge, and of course, another 4 or 5 flagship standard setters or frameworks have also made an intent to work together jointly in order to create a sort of a easily understandable, aligned reporting structure. As you know, all like GRI, SASB, TCFD, all grab different aspects of sustainability reporting and different aspects of the double materiality concept. So them coming under sort of a more aligned approach definitely helps the industry to create clarity on what to report and how to report to. So this is again something that has started this year. Refinitiv is founder of the Future of Sustainable Data Alliance. We are also very active in identifying data gaps and data holes and working with industry members to make sure that we are aligned and we provide the right views and technologies to collect those and data sets and bring it to the investors and the financial community. So these are the sort of the 5 things that are to be looked at and will determine the course of 2021.
Thank you, Barney. We have a question from the audience. So this person says it's slightly off topic, but do you see organizations single sourcing ESG data, or is the market too fragmented at the moment, and as such they will need to source the data from multiple sources to gain appropriate coverage?
This is a very interesting question. Maybe I put out a slide that we brought here. I think the question will be answered by the data requirements that the specific company would have, and actually the data granularity that the actual provider in focus would provide. Refinitiv is a very unique data collector in that sense that we collect data on all angles of ESG, including social and governance. We have a very transparent methodology. We have 450 collected data points that we collect cross-sectionally. So it definitely gives a wide set of data sets to be looked into when assessing the sustainability readiness or the sustainable operations of a company. This all relates to the fact as well that the more granular this data you have, the easier you comply to different disclosure regulations. May they come from different regimes. So in our case, I think we can say that because we are the organizers of this webinar, we are very strong in maybe being the only or one source or just one of few sources when it comes to client needs on ESG data.
Yeah, and Barney, just from our perspective, I mean, I would 100% agree with you where we are seeing, clients want to use one source or a single source as their main source. And I think, again, that comes down to the fact that, you should be choosing a data vendor with sufficient coverage then that can give you all the information that you need in those cases. We've got a comment from the audience. Yep.
Go on.
No, we have a comment from the audience. this person is just saying that large wealth funds such as BlackRock, for instance, they insist on sustainable investments. So I think that's pretty much in line with, what we are seeing as well when speaking to clients. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Barney.
I'm supportive of that comment. Obviously, it has different colors, and BlackRock has gone a long way to from that initial letter of Larry Fink on the sense of a purpose to turn them into real actions. But BlackRock Aladdin is also providing ESG data and ESG analytics. So definitely a very strong move forward in that arena. We are one of the providers in that space.
And this person actually followed up with a question, which is linked to that comment. And they're just saying, what is a practical output of this? Will they actually stop investing in oil and gas companies at all? So what are your thoughts on this? And I think that this is maybe where, we can see transition bonds come in, right? Where those are the kind of bonds that these oil and gas companies will actually launch.
Yeah, I think so. I cannot really comment in the name of BlackRock because, of course, it's their policy and their management of that policy. But going from the letter that the sense of the purpose and actually with the follow-up letters that followed that in the subsequent years, what it says is that BlackRock will have to be convinced that the company is taking the right measures to actually transition. So it's not necessarily, as I read it, is that they are immediately divesting from all fossils. It's basically saying that if you are a fossil fuel industry member and then you are not really showcasing how you are going to transition into being an energy company instead of an oil company, then there is going to be repercussions on that. So, of course, this is a longer conversation, another fireside chat maybe, but this is how I would see that. Divestment is definitely a very crucial and central point of transition risk, and it's a very much of a timing issue as well. It's a multi-factor issue to think about. I'm happy to follow up on that earlier here. But once maybe I can have a question back if there is no other questions. But we have discussed several aspects of COVID, and that COVID itself will bring the old system back, and it's going to be the end of ESG in 2020. How do you see that in your area, in the asset management community? How did that change over the course of the year? Anything that you have picked up on your end?
Yeah. So from our side, we've seen a definite increase this year in the incorporation of ESG principles into asset managers' investment processes, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and investors are now convinced that ESG integrated portfolios can mitigate risk and increase returns. So yes, admittedly, ESG had been a major theme across the asset management world before the pandemic happened. However, when the pandemic hit, there was a fear that environmental and sustainable finance topics would take a little bit of a back seat as the world actually dealt with the new COVID threat. And these fears disappeared quite quickly. However, when ESG funds started outperforming your classic indices in the first few weeks of the crisis, and several ESG funds were able to soften the blow a little bit to the loss in value. So previously, ESG as a topic came up in about, I would say, 70% of our client interactions, where now it is raised in literally each and every meeting we have. More specifically, asset managers are now looking for increased company disclosures around social factors such as employee health policies, health teams being created, health trainings being done, and also, health improvements while anti-corruption is definitely also coming up as a big topic with institutional investors. And we get regular questions around data coverage on these 2 points specifically now. So this is where clients who have access to Refinitiv's ESG data sets actually benefit, because they have access to very granular company information on more than 400 ESG metrics, so that they can get a proper insight into the underlying ESG metrics themselves. And this year, the pandemic showed us that companies with a stronger ESG records generate alpha. They outperform their peers and have less volatility and downside risk. It's quite important that portfolio managers understand their portfolio risks, as we all know. And when it comes to ESG investing, how they know how to mitigate risks. So thus, it's vital for a portfolio manager to have access to portfolio stress testing and optimization tools, so that portfolio managers can actually firstly assess how their current portfolio setup will perform if we see another COVID-19 outbreak, and improve overall future resilience, as well as how to position their portfolio managers to achieve a predetermined portfolio ESG score. And as a result, it's important for portfolio managers to choose a data vendor that can react quite quickly to these kind of events. So as an example, in October this year, Refinitiv added 2 new COVID-19 related historical scenarios to our MSCI risk metrics product, which now are benefiting, our clients. And you can see those 2 scenarios on the screen, where under your MSCI risk metrics, table in icon, you can go to your scenarios, you can find COVID-19, and on the right-hand side, you'll see that we've got the 2 scenarios there, V-shaped and swoosh-shaped. So basically, Bonnie, to conclude, there are positives and negatives to everything. And even though this pandemic is quite far from over, there is a great opportunity offered by the crisis to fund managers. And that is to make the integration of ESG factors across their portfolios the new normal, as it is a key to crisis-resilient long-term value creation, as we've seen now earlier this year. Amazing.
It's always great to see that we are so much aligned on these things.
There is one more question which I think we've answered now, and that is, this person wanted to know our take on the performance of the ESG factors from an investment perspective, both during the crisis period and in the longer term. So I've given my view on that. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Barney?
Not necessarily. I think the only thing that I would say is that the factor, the definition of the factor is changing very much, or it's actually going to be the one that should be the textbook factor. When earlier in the last couple of years, or up to the last couple of years, one rating, an ESG rating, was enough to sort of decide a company's fate. Oh, is this A positive or is this B minus? Now, financial market participants, in my view, do and should be able to understand a little bit better, what an ESG rating means, that it's actually, a aggregation of several things. And if you really want to have that extra profit and that alpha, then you have to go beyond the one letter, the one number, and really look into pillars of ESG or categories, or albeit, or actually, the reported number by the company to be able to build a successful set of factors around ESG that is not just a letter based, but it includes several other variables and metrics. I don't know whether
questions from the audience. I think we've got about 5 minutes left. If there's any final concluding remarks you'd like to make, Barney.
Look, I think as I was talking quite a lot today, the remarks are, again, just to recap on COVID-19, hopefully puts other things into perspective. I think it creates, although we all appreciate the severeness that it brought to different individuals, it really creates a big reset, an opportunity, as you just said, Franita, and it creates a lot of immediate actions for 2021 that will make the news loud. I wish everybody a very good holiday season and of course a way better 2021 that 2020 was, and I hope that we will get back at least some or most possibly most of the social interaction that was so abundant in 2019. So again, just wishing everybody the best for the holidays and for the next year.
Right. Thanks very much, Barney, and thank you for everyone who joined the session today. We appreciate you making the time, and from our side as well, happy festive season, even though it's going to be a little bit of a different one this time around, and we'll speak again in the new year. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.